I'm Deb Kimmett, and this is the news brief for December 20th, 2021. A shout out goes to the Massage Health Practitioners and COVID-19 Facebook group for calling some of this to my attention. I also belong to various lists that provide overviews of the research that's out there as well. You'll notice at the bottom of the slides, I have an abbreviated source. I mainly want you to see the author and the date because I try to bring the most current research to the table. And the full citation is in the companion PDF file. Remember, science changes, so what we know today may not be what we know tomorrow. And today, that statement about things changing is really appropriate here. Today's mostly going to be about the Omicron variant. And as I was preparing this news brief today, more and more data kept coming in. So as I get into talking about the Omicron variant, please note that the information here is what we know today. The information will evolve and change as we learn more. Before we get into talking about Omicron, how do you pronounce it? Good housekeeping says that there are 4 common ways to say it. Omicron is a Greek letter, and since the Pfizer CEO is from Greece, the Wall Street Journal put up a video of him being asked to pronounce it. He says Omicron. 3 months ago, I said that there wasn't a variant on the horizon that could take on Delta. And I also said that it was likely to come out of an area where there's poor vaccination rates, because without vaccines to stop it, the virus mutates. And I also said that the only way a variant could supplant the Delta variant was if it was more contagious. And sure enough, here comes Omicron, and there's every indication that it's going to be bad, very bad, worse than Delta. Omicron became the dominant variant in South Africa in November, and it's much more contagious than Delta. And cases are doubling every 2 to 3 days. And New York has been breaking daily case records, much worse than when the pandemic was at its worst last winter. Over the weekend, the director of the National Institutes of Health said that with the Omicron variant, we could eventually see 1 million new cases per day, which breaks the Delta record of about 250,000 cases per day. And then Dr. Fauci chimed in saying that it would lead to record numbers of hospitalizations. We know that prior to Omicron, unvaccinated adults who'd had COVID before were over 5 times more likely to get it than those who were vaccinated with the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. And now preliminary results show that natural immunity is even less effective against Omicron. An early December study from South Africa said that if a person has already had COVID, they're 3 times more likely to get the Omicron variant as opposed to other variants, including Delta. And an even more recent number from a study published on December 17th from the United Kingdom said that reinfection from Omicron is 5.4 times greater than Delta. So taken together, these numbers mean that unvaccinated, previously infected adults are much, much more likely to be reinfected than those who've been vaccinated. So think about it. If before an unvaccinated person is 5 times more likely to get infected than an unvaccinated person, and now their chances are 5.4 times more than that, 5 times more, that's a lot. That's a really big cause for concern. The most important metric to note here is that while an older study in the UK showed that a prior infection provided 85% protection against reinfection, this recent study now indicates that that number's fallen to 19%. That drop is significant. That's also cause for concern. And on top of that, it also seems to be hitting 18 to 29-year-olds harder than Delta did. So let's talk about prevalence. Today, NBC News and the Washington Post reported around 6 p.m. Eastern Time that the CDC released new data on prevalence. This is how quickly things are changing. So I went out to the CDC website and here's what I found. On December 11th, Delta made up about 87% of all new cases and Omicron 13%. What's remarkable is that only 1 week later, on December 18th, it's almost flipped. Omicron made up 73.2% of all new cases, and Delta had dropped down to 26.6%. So you can see just how quickly it's spreading. And as for severity, a few weeks ago, there wasn't that much data. And it appeared at first that cases were less severe in South Africa, but they're now saying that cases were less severe possibly because vaccines and past infections made it look like it was less severe. And that reporting tells me that they just looked at overall cases, not what happened among those who were unvaccinated and never had had COVID before. So this just underlines how it's so important to understand what data you're looking at and how data can be skewed. And in fact, one of the things that I'm finding now is that people are saying, oh, it's less severe, and other people are saying, oh, it's more severe. And so what we need to be doing is making sure that people are looking at the latest data and not old data, because things are changing so quickly. And the thing is that the data on severity is starting to come in, and it's also not looking good. The UK study found, quote, no evidence of Omicron having lower severity than Delta. So this is the most recent research. And this basically means that it can be as severe or even more severe. We just don't know fully yet. But again, all these results are preliminary and more research is needed. All indications are that this variant will be similar to Delta as far as severity is concerned. But again, we don't know yet. And so the important thing is to make sure that you really check your sources and really check to make sure that you are getting the latest information. As far as vaccine effectiveness goes, Pfizer found that in lab test studies, 3 doses work best against Omicron, but 2 doses can ward off severe disease. 2 things about this. Remember that vaccines don't always prevent the disease. They're designed to ward off severe illness. And second, these are not real-world results. They're from a lab and are therefore preliminary. Also, Pfizer hopes to have a specific vaccine to combat Omicron ready in about 100 days, by March. And the recent UK study puts a finer point on the whole issue of vaccine effectiveness. What they're saying is that vaccine effectiveness against Omicron after 2 doses is between 0 and 20%. That's pretty low. And after a booster, it's between 55 and 80%. Also, Moderna just came out with info today that their booster offers, quote, some good level of protection, unquote, against Omicron. And if you like to geek out on stuff like this, there's an amazing article that uses great graphics to explain the Omicron mutations. It goes into detail comparing and contrasting the Alpha, Delta, and Omicron variants. It's really fascinating and well worth the time to take a look at. And as far as Omicron treatment, GlaxoSmithKline said that in vitro studies, its monoclonal antibody treatment appears to be effective against Omicron. It remains to be seen if it's effective in real-world situations, but these preliminary studies look pretty good. Also, according to the World Health Organization, convalescent plasma is not an effective treatment. So what's the massage therapist takeaway from all of this? Omicron is going to be bad. It'll spread fast, so watch the numbers for your area closely. If you've been vaccinated, I strongly suggest that you get your booster as soon as possible. If you're not vaccinated, I strongly suggest that you get vaccinated if you're medically able. If you've never been infected, you do not have immunity. That's why it's called a novel coronavirus. Your body has not seen a disease like this before and doesn't know how to fight it. So you don't have much protection here. And previous infection is not as likely to help you. You are way, way more likely to be reinfected than if you were vaccinated. So get those boosters, get those vaccinations. Another takeaway is to double down on your safety protocols. You may want to consider tightening them up even more if you can. For example, when the numbers were good, sometimes I let it slide for certain clients if they went out to eat. And with Delta, I tightened things up. And if someone went out to eat or other risky behaviors like that, they couldn't come in for 14 days. About 3 weeks ago, I considered temporarily lifting that restriction for some of my clients because the numbers had improved again, with the caveat that I'd add that restriction back in when the numbers went back up. Well, after seeing how the case numbers are exploding on the East Coast and elsewhere, I've taken it off the table, even though we have really good numbers in my county right now. It's staying in place for the foreseeable future. Another takeaway is to consider using testing as a screening protocol. For example, those over-the-counter antigen tests. If the numbers continue to get worse, you may want to consider pausing your practice for a bit. And another way I'm tightening things up is that because people are traveling and probably seeing people outside their pod over the holidays, I pause my practice to minimize exposure. And after January 1st, I'll only see a few trusted clients until at least mid-January. I picked that time frame because if there's a holiday surge, we're going to know by mid-January, and then I'll decide from there what the next steps will be. And if you do get sick, monoclonal antibody treatment appears to be an effective treatment. And in other COVID news, if you haven't heard, the CDC is recommending the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines over the J&J vaccine, but the J&J vaccine is better than no vaccine. And they're making this recommendation because of a, quote, rare complication, thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome, unquote, which the J&J vaccine has. These are basically blood clotting issues. So again, lean towards Pfizer and Moderna versus the J&J shot. Something interesting also came out in the last few weeks. The study itself was released in October, but didn't make the news until December 9th. And that is that they think they figured out the link between obesity and severe COVID. A preprint study found that the virus can directly infect the fatty tissues and cause inflammation that's associated with severe COVID-19. The researchers think that this may, quote, explain the link between obesity and severe COVID-19, unquote. They think it plays a role in long COVID because the fat cells act as a reservoir and can store or hide the virus. The caution here is that it's a preprint study and has not undergone peer review. But if it makes it through that peer review process, it could be an explanation as to why obese people have been disproportionately affected by the virus. And finally, the CDC is now recommending a tested stay program for schools to help keep kids in schools. Previously, if there's an outbreak at schools, unvaccinated kids and kids not fully vaccinated who were exposed to the virus were sent home to quarantine. And of course, that's incredibly disruptive, both for the kids being pulled out of school and they may not even get the virus, or the parents because they have to take time off for work or find other kind of childcare arrangements. But now what the CDC is recommending is that they want to keep kids in school by having them do this test to stay program, which is they have the kids masked, they monitor them for symptoms and test them regularly. For example, in Illinois, they were tested every other day, and in California, they were tested twice weekly. And what they found is that this test to stay program was just as effective as sending the kids home to quarantine. So if you're hearing about kids staying in school, even though they've been exposed to the virus, hopefully they're doing it underneath this program because it's a safe way to make sure that the kids are safe and monitored and they get to stay in school so that if they don't develop the virus, they're good to go. But if they do develop the virus, they're caught, that's caught, and they're sent home. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. And again, please remember that science changes, so what we know today may not be what we know tomorrow. I hope you have a happy holiday season, and may you all have a safe and healthy new year.